Seeing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the volunteer vaccination policy. I think it's listed on page 104 of your materials, and Governor Williams-Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the past 45 days, I have attended or participated in 4 different bar association meetings, events, including the in-person RPPT mid-year section, as well as the solo and small section annual meeting. And this policy is top of mind above almost anything else that the bar and the bog is doing. People don't know anything about ethos, but they know a whole lot about the vaccine policy. And I'll tell you, at the RPPT meeting, we had the very first night, there was an exposure that began the next morning with a disclosure that, oh, somebody just tested positive, and there was exposure last night at dinner. We have seen a tremendous shift in what the COVID virus is doing in this pandemic. In fact, if you've been seeing the news today, President Biden has come down with COVID. Not really surprising, considering he just had a whirlwind trip through the Middle East, where he was in very close quarters. And especially after the solo and small section was talking about they're having an event, and I would invite Governor-elect Petrasic to weigh in on this, that they are having an event for the section at a Mariners game in a suite, not out in the bleachers, in a suite, where you walk through an internal hallway with a ceiling that's no more than 8 feet high in a confined hallway. And they're saying, we're not going to be checking to see if people are vaccinated, and claiming it falls within the exemption of being an outdoor event. And I realize that we are in an entirely different place than we were 2 years ago. We now have 4 vaccines. Again, if you were paying attention this week, the Novavax, which is the old-fashioned vaccine, the non-mRNA vaccine, has been approved by the FDA for use. And the reality is that we cannot provide a experience that is the same as an in-person through the hybrid that we're offering. It's wonderful. It's great for those who, I just came down with a rhinovirus and had been self-quarantining at home for the last 8 days, making sure that I wouldn't be here sick and coughing on people. And knowing that if I was still as what I was over the weekend, I could be doing my job remotely. But it is not a substitute for the in-person. In fact, the new governor orientation this morning had 3 former governors from the 6th district talk about the importance of people being together and the critical work that happens from this body that requires an understanding of us beyond being Brady Bunch squares. And so that is why I asked for this to be brought back, because I believe that the policy is exclusionary in a way that is trying to, and again, and I'll throw it in. The Supreme Court of the United States in the last month has really gone down a path of a world that I don't want to be part of. And I feel that this policy that we are going to be mandating on top of other people, telling them what to do with their bodies when they can make their own choices, is just a bridge too far for me anymore. We are no longer in the throes of the emergency component of this pandemic. And I think that it is appropriate for our members, for our volunteers, and for our governors and staff who have their own reasons for making their decisions for their health choices to let them make their choices. And that is why I've asked us to come back and revisit the policy that will allow people to participate in person if they want, regardless of whether they have been vaccinated or not. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, so we don't have a motion on the floor yet. I don't know if there's a motion that somebody's going to be making.
I mean, if nobody wants to engage in this conversation, and am I the only one, then that's fine. I will just ask the bar then to make sure that we have staff people at the Mariners game to check vaccination cards for people going inside to a building to attend a Mariners game.
Have any hands up? Just, Governor Peterson.
Yeah, I agree with what's just been said. I think when we adopted it a while back, it was the prudent thing. It was the right thing to do. But I think we're not in a pandemic anymore. We're in an endemic. And I don't think I'm smarter than all the health experts in the state of Washington. So I think it's time to do something that's more inclusive for our volunteers. Thank you.
Governor Clark, followed by past President Schicchetti.
Thanks, Brian. I wasn't aware we're in an endemic. And as far as I know, we're still in a pandemic. And I think, as you all know, I spent 2 weeks fighting for my life with COVID and almost died from it. And so while I understand that it's my body, my choice, it's not your body, your choice when unvaccinated people spread the virus more than those that are vaccinated. That's science. That's not me saying it. That is science. So I would like to make a motion that we keep our current policy as is. Thanks.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to keep the vaccination policy the way it is. We've got past President Schicchetti, followed by Governor Angeville, followed by Governor Brent Williams-Ruth, followed by Kevin Platchey. Anybody in the room here that I've missed? Okay. So go ahead, former President Schicchetti.
Thank you, President Collison. Yeah, I tend to agree with President-elect Clark. I haven't heard that we've moved from a pandemic to an epidemic. And you'll see just around this room, several people are wearing masks and are still concerned about where we are. When I received Governor Williams-Ruth's email from June 14th, at that time, we were looking a little different, but we were still going through some variants. And Governor Williams-Ruth put a link in his email to the CDC so you could check each state and where we're at. And I checked yesterday, and right now in the last 7 days, there's been 101 deaths in Washington. We're at 77.8% of fully vaccinated, which was a little less than the percentage that was in June. I don't know how that happens, but it's now a little less for whatever reasons. Clark County recommended just not too long ago, a few days ago, to require masks in public spaces again because of the two variants. I think it was 4 and 5 I recall correctly, BA4, BA5. And my conversation or correspondence with the Chief Justice, when they adopted the same policy, they just recently, as a month ago, voted to retain it, but will allow guests at oral argument come fall. So they're even waiting for the fall to see what it looks like then. And probably with good reason, because again, we have these variants that pop up all the time. I understand and agree with Governor Williams-Ruth that the meetings are much better in person. That I think we get things done better. We trust each other better. I think the Zoom has significant limitations that doesn't facilitate civility or good work. But we also have to be mindful of the safety and the comfort of the participants. And we passed that policy, and we said we weren't going to revisit it until later. I think it said August, maybe even later than that. So I think it's, in my opinion, inappropriate to do anything with the policy at the present time. Maybe come fall, and when the Supreme Court is changing their policy, that might be an appropriate time. I think we should look at it then. But I fully support President-elect Governor Clark's motion to not do anything with our policy at the present time. Thank you.
Governor Angelville.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we're all tired of the virus, but being tired of it does not make it go away. And I think it's a question of public health. I think it's a question of science. It's not a civil rights issue. President-elect Clark's reasons are sound, and they're also deeply personal. And I think that is an extremely moving example of why we need to keep this policy. The other point that I want to make is if our Supreme Court has not seen fit to change the policy, I don't see why we should. And I also don't see any science backing up the claim that somehow we're not in a pandemic. What I see is statistics pointed out by past President Shichetti that people are still dying. And possibly they're dying because they don't recognize science. So let's be rational, let's be logical about this, and let's keep our policy.
Thank you, Governor Angelville. Governor Williams-Ruth.
Thank you. First, I'll just start with Governor Angelville's last point about people dying because they don't believe in science. That's their right. I am not saying the science isn't saying that we're not even in a pandemic. But do you know what? We had a new governor orientation meeting in a small boardroom where there were 8 people crammed around a table that was not socially distanced. The science is also not telling us yet to put on masks. I do have my mask here. And after having consultation with the person sitting next to me, I am feeling comfortable not putting it on right now. But I was wearing it in the boardroom yesterday because that's my choice. And that is science. It's also science that we should be socially distanced. And yet here we are, 2 to a table. Yet we have all this room in this space, and we could be set up in a different way where we could be, helping ensure that we're not going to transmit. It's not about what science is or is not saying. It's about what we as governmental agencies are pushing down onto people. That's where I'm coming down. You know, if we were in a situation where the CDC is telling us that everyone needs to be, you know, that they're going to mandate vaccines, okay, fine. They're not. They're recommending it. They're telling people that if you get it when you're vaccinated, you have a much greater chance of having a less severe case. And again, I'm sorry for President-elect Clark's experience with COVID. And that happened, if I remember correctly, about 4 months before the first vaccine was even available. That he was one of the first people to see the ravages of the very first strain. The BA.5 variant, which I thought I had because everyone was saying that, oh, you know, you're going to get the symptoms of fatigue, headache, sore throat, and it won't even show up on a test for 4 or 5 days. So a week and a half ago, when I started getting sick, I'm like, oh, damn it, it finally got me. And I had just, the only thing I had been to was a client's 50th birthday party held outside in their very spacious outdoor backyard, where the only time I was actually anywhere near anyone was at the fake roulette table and blackjack that they'd set up with the James Bond theme. Like, really? I was sat next to those people for 10 minutes playing faux blackjack and I'm going to get COVID because of it? Well, ended up not being COVID. 12 tests later and I'm not COVID. But simply going into and maintaining this policy when there's no science, you want to go to science? Great. There's no science that says we should be excluding people who don't have a vaccine. There are strong recommendations to get it. I am double vaxxed and single boosted. I'm not yet old enough to be eligible for a second boost. That's my choice. Again, if we're going to be going down this path and the sections and our members are going to be going back to having events, and we're going to be telling people who can and cannot appear because they are part of the Washington State Bar Association, then what's the difference between when I was at the Harry Potter in the Seattle Symphony, where I was sitting in the middle of the orchestra section with a 90-foot ceiling above my head, or in a luxury suite at T-Mobile Park, which I've been in, that is a enclosed space that basically has a door about the width of the double doors to this room. Would we consider this room an outdoor space? Because if so, I mean, if not, then again, the luxury suites at Husky Stadium, Climate Pledge Arena, well, Climate Pledge, no, okay, not that one, but you know, Lumen Field, T-Mobile Park, and Husky Stadium would not be considered outdoor spaces. They are indoor spaces that have a one wall that's open to the air. I mean, who are we really trying to serve by mandating that people have to get this injection? I don't know the answer to that question. And I no longer feel comfortable being the one that has to stand there as the liaison to these groups when they look at us and say, why are people not coming to these events? And them openly saying to their staff liaison, we're not going to be providing anyone that's going to check their, vaccination status. I think it's misguided for us to keep going down this path.
Got our Chief Advancement Officer, Kevin Platchey.
Thank you, President Tollefson. I'm not going to talk about whether we should have a vaccination policy or not, but I do want to point out some considerations and challenges with the current policies and procedures. Right now, we have two policies or procedures in place. One is the volunteer policy, which the board voted on and implemented. The other, which we implemented after the volunteer policy was put into place, is an attendee policy, because what the volunteer policy left absent was, what do you do with the attendees at an event? So we established a attendee procedure, which requires all attendees which mirrors the volunteer policy. It requires all attendees to show proof of vaccination, including the booster. We added that in after the vaccination. The volunteer policy was strengthened to include it, but it also allows for a test out option, because attendees are a much larger audience than volunteers. Lots of people come to events like CLEs, and we don't even know who they are sometimes until the day they get there. So for the events that we put together and develop, we have staff at those events that check. But two audiences are being treated differently. That's one thing to point out. The volunteers have a more stringent obligation, where attendees are able to test out. They don't have to show a vaccination. And I also just want to point out, we're talking about two different populations, but in theory, the attendee procedure and policy that's in place also encompasses volunteers, because every volunteer at an event is also an attendee. So, I want to point these out because it would be helpful to not have two conflicting policies. And my suggestion would be, this is just my suggestion, would be to at least integrate the two, if nothing else, but really to allow staff to, if you want to keep a vaccination policy in place, to allow the executive director and staff to bring back a comprehensive one that applies to everyone, that might be a little more palatable along the lines of the attendee policy, which does allow more options for people. And then to the challenge that we face with staffing events, we require staff to be at events that we develop and that we put together, but there is no way with the current staffing that we have that we could have staff at every event. The sections do a whole lot of things on their own in person, and they're getting way back to it much more frequently, that we can't have a staff person at every event that the sections are doing. So there is going to have to be some volunteer participation if this board wants to, or wants to keep this vaccination policy in place. It's going to require volunteer participation to help authenticate and verify, because there's no way that staff can be at every single event that this organization in whole puts on in one way or the other. So those are my comments.
Thank you for those comments. Governor Higginson.
Thank you. I'm in support of this motion. I think that Governor Williams-Ruth makes some excellent points. I do think that we can't live in fear, and though I respect, well, I don't know what to say really at this point. I hear what people have to say. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm opposing this motion. I was thinking that we were on the motion that Brett Williams-Ruth was thinking about making, but did not. I'm opposing the motion to keep things the same. I do think Kevin's made some good points about trying to make the policies match. I do want to point out that we're bandying about a science, and none of us are scientists. And I've heard recently that we're not experts on surveys, so we need to hire an expert on surveys. We're not experts on salary studies, so we need to hire experts on salary studies. And yet we're supposedly now don't need any medical guidance from anyone before we make these decisions about whether we should require vaccinations or not. So just because we seem to be in kind of a debate posture, I pulled some information about this myself, and I found an article that said that according to a new study from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that's Center for Disease Control, the effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccine booster doses dropped well under 50% after 4 months against subvariants of the virus that causes COVID-19. This is a study from the Center for Disease Control. They indicate that the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines provided just 51% protection against emergency department visits, urgent care encounters, and hospitalization. And after 150 plus days, the effectiveness dropped from 51% to 12%. This article goes on to say that underlining the waning effectiveness against severe illness, the majority of patients admitted to the hospitals between December 2021 and June 2022 had received at least 2 doses of the vaccines. Further, the percentage of unvaccinated patients dropped during the later period, going from 41.6% to 28.6% for hospitalized patients, and from 41.4% to 31% for emergency department and urgent care patients. So the researchers, some of whom work for the Center for Disease Control, theorize that the protection known as natural immunity that many unvaccinated people enjoy from having had COVID-19 could be a factor in the drop in the effectiveness of the vaccines. So I want to note that for you, that we're chasing something that doesn't exist, according to this most recent study, when we say that unvaccinated people are dangerous and that they should be excluded. I also note that Illinois Governor Pritzker's office announced on July 13th that colleges and universities across the state can drop COVID-19 vaccine mandates for staff and students. I note that the Superior Court Judges Association does not require vaccination or proof of vaccination, and they simply request people to certify that they do not have any symptoms of COVID before attending an event. And finally, I note another article from Dr. Robert Malone, who invented the mRNA vaccine, and then later said that it was not effective and it was not intended to be used for the purpose that it's been used for. Citing a study that researchers with the Imperial College London and the United Kingdom Health Security Agency found that people who received 3 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine and were infected with the Wuhan strain had a lower level of protection against later strains when compared with people who had not been infected. Other groups, including researchers with Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, found the vaccines much less effective against Omicron subvariants than the Wuhan strain. In fact, they also found negative effectiveness among vaccinated groups, meaning those who get vaccinated are more likely to get infected. And I'll end with this, that in some areas, according to the article that I am citing here, the vaccinated accounted for a majority of those infected or in hospitals or dying with COVID-19. In Louisiana, for example, and these are Center for Disease Control statistics, 70% of the deaths recorded between June 23rd and June 29th were among the vaccinated. So I'm not a scientist, you're not a scientist. However, if we're going to be looking at the Center for Disease Control, well, then let's look at some of the information that's available. People are fear-mongering by saying that vaccinations are required to prevent infections among other people. If anyone is concerned about catching COVID, then you're welcome to stay home and participate remotely. That is your right, and that is something that you should be allowed to do. But do not tell our volunteers and people that have chosen either not to get vaccinated or chosen not to play into the requirements for providing proof of vaccination. Do not tell those people that they cannot make the decision to attend in person. If you're worried, don't show up in person. But I agree with Governor Williams-Ruth that this is something that is a personal choice. And these are just a few articles I was able to pull. There are many more supporting the same information that I have just stated for you. So if somebody has something something that they'd like to cite to me differently than what I've just cited from the Center for Disease Control, well, please feel free to do so. But the fact that you could find something different than what I just found would argue in favor of dropping this requirement, because it appears that there is a lot of different information out there. And these are, by the way, what I just cited for you was from July 12th, 14th, and 15th. So it is pretty up to date. If you have something from the past, I would suggest it's not as valid as what I just proposed. It's time to just let people move on with their lives and allow drop the vaccination requirement as other places have, and let people make their own decision about whether they want to attend in person at WSBA events or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Higginson. We're going to stop the discussion now because we have a very important presentation to make, Local Heroes Award, at lunchtime, which has already started. It's going to be in the Marriott Hotel Chambers Bay, Room 3.
Mr. President, before we break, could you at least let us know who's in order to speak?
Yes, yes, you are next.
Okay, thank you.
So you know. And then Governor Abell is after that. And I'm looking around the room, I don't see anybody, but I'm sure people will, after a nice lunch break, will probably have other things to say. So we'll see you all back here at a little after, I'm going to say 1:10 p.m.